The city never truly slept. At night, when the neon lights flickered across rain-slick streets and the hum of traffic gave way to whispers of the underground, a new game of power and betrayal was always underway. At the heart of this shifting empire stood Adrian Moretti. To the outside world, he was the polished heir to a thriving shipping empire, a man of poise and charm. But beneath the tailored suits and striking confidence, Adrian was a man born into shadows, his bloodline tied to generations of quiet violence and whispered deals. Adrian's father, Giancarlo Moretti, was a legend in his time. He built the Moretti name from obscurity to dominance, a family that walked the razor's edge between respectability and ruthless control. The empire he forged wasn't won with paperwork and smiles. It was written in sweat, loyalty, and too often, blood. But empires have cracks, and Giancarlo's downfall began with a single betrayal. His most trusted confidant, a man he once treated as a brother, turned against him in pursuit of wealth and power. The betrayal led to a spiral of violence, enemies at every corner, and the weakening of the Moretti stronghold. Adrian was just a boy when it happened, but he never forgot. He remembered his father's eyes the night their home was set ablaze by rivals. He remembered the gunshots that echoed through the marble halls, and the way his mother clutched him as they escaped into the cold night. He remembered the silence afterward, when Giancarlo's body was lowered into the ground, and Adrian vowed silently that one day he would rise above them all. Years passed, and Adrian grew into the kind of man his father had once been, only sharper, colder. He had inherited his father's piercing green eyes and commanding presence, but his heart carried the scars of loss and betrayal. Every decision he made, every calculated risk, was rooted in the promise that no one would ever take from him what they had stolen from Giancarlo. Yet power is a lonely crown. The more Adrian built, the more enemies circled. In the underground, trust was a currency rarer than gold, and betrayal was always just one whisper away. Among those whispers was Dante Ricci, Adrian's oldest friend. Dante had grown up beside him, loyal through their youth, a brother in all but blood. Together they carved paths through the city's underworld, dismantling rivals, outmaneuvering officials, and consolidating their control. For years it was unthinkable that one would move without the other. But history has a cruel way of repeating itself. Just as Giancarlo was betrayed by a man he trusted, Adrian would soon discover that even the strongest bonds could fracture. It began with small things. Deals that fell through. Rivals who seemed too well informed. Shadows moving closer to Adrian's empire. He dismissed it at first. Paranoia was natural in his world. But then came the night when a shipment worth millions disappeared, vanishing as if into thin air. Adrian was furious. He summoned his men, demanded answers, but none came. It wasn't until weeks later that whispers reached his ear. Whispers that Dante had been meeting in secret with Adrian's enemies. The thought tore at him. Could Dante, his brother, truly betray him? He confronted Dante in the dead of night, in the penthouse that overlooked the city. The rain lashed against the glass as Adrian's voice cut through the silence. "Tell me it isn't true," he demanded, his jaw tight, his hand resting dangerously close to the pistol at his side. Dante didn't flinch. His dark eyes held no fear, only resignation. "It's true," he said simply. "I'm tired of living in your shadow, Adrian. Everything we built. You take the glory, you wear the crown, while I am nothing but your shadow." The words cut deeper than any blade. For a moment, Adrian saw not an enemy, but the boy he once called his brother. But that moment passed quickly. In his world, betrayal had no forgiveness. Adrian raised his gun. His hand trembled, but his voice was steady. "You chose your path, Dante, and it ends here." The shot rang out, echoing through the penthouse. Dante collapsed, his final breath a whisper drowned by the rain. Adrian stood over him, chest heaving, the weight of history pressing down on his shoulders. His father had been betrayed, and now so had he. The cycle was unbroken, and the loneliness of power sank deeper into his bones. From that night onward, Adrian became colder, sharper, a man who trusted no one fully. His empire grew, but so did the shadows around him. He surrounded himself with men loyal out of fear, not love, and in the quiet hours of the night, when the city slept, he wondered if this was the destiny carved for all men like him. To rise high, only to be devoured by whispers in the dark. But destiny had other plans. Because somewhere beyond the violence and betrayal, fate was preparing to weave a story Adrian never expected. A story that would test not only his power, but his heart. And it would all begin the night he crossed paths with Elena Marquez, a woman who would change everything. The stormy night when Adrian Moretti first met Elena Marquez was one of those moments that seemed ordinary at first glance, yet later revealed itself as the turning point of a lifetime. Elena was a nurse at St. Catherine's Hospital, a woman who lived far from the whispers of power and violence that haunted Adrian's world. Her life was simple, but not easy. Long hours under flickering fluorescent lights, the endless cries of patients echoing through the corridors, and the burden of carrying more than her share of responsibility. She was 26, her dark hair always pulled into a bun, her face marked by exhaustion, but also a quiet strength. Elena had spent years caring for her younger sister, Isabella, after their parents died, and her job was the fragile thread holding their small world together. She never imagined that thread would one day entwine with the life of a man like Adrian. That night, Adrian had walked straight into fate's trap. The ambush came as he was leaving a meeting with one of his few remaining allies. A black SUV screeched around the corner, its windows rolling down, gun barrels flashing in the darkness. Bullets rained down, shattering glass and tearing through the night. Adrian's men fought back, but chaos spread. Tires screeched, screams echoed, and in the madness Adrian was struck. A bullet tore through his side, burning like fire. His men managed to drag him into a car and speed away, but the damage was done. By the time they crashed into the back entrance of St. Catherine's, Adrian was barely conscious. Blood soaked his tailored suit, his hand pressed desperately against the wound. His men shouted for help, their voices echoing through the sterile hallways. Elena was on night shift. She rushed toward the noise, her shoes squeaking against the tiled floor. And then she saw him. A man bleeding, pale, his eyes still sharp despite the agony. For a moment their worlds collided in silence. She didn't know his name, but something in his gaze unsettled her. It wasn't fear. It was defiance. "Get me a gurney now," she shouted to the staff, snapping out of the trance. Hours passed in chaos. The bullet had missed his vital organs, but the blood loss was severe. Elena worked tirelessly, her hands steady, her mind focused. And all the while, Adrian's green eyes followed her, burning with unspoken words. When the surgery was finally over, and he was stable, she leaned against the wall, exhausted. She had saved many lives before, but this one felt different. She didn't know why. For Adrian, the experience was unlike anything he'd faced. He had always been the savior or the executioner, never the one needing to be saved. Yet here he was, his life hanging by a thread held in the hands of a stranger. When dawn broke, Adrian awoke to find Elena sitting by his bed, her head bowed in sleep. For the first time in years, he felt something other than rage or suspicion. He felt vulnerable. He studied her face, the way the early light softened her features. She wasn't part of his world, and that made her dangerous, because she was real. By the time she stirred awake, Adrian was already plotting. "You saved my life," he said, his voice low, gravelly. Elena blinked, startled to see him awake. "I'm a nurse. That's what I do." "No." Adrian shook his head, his gaze piercing hers. "You don't understand. In my world, debts are everything, and now, your life belongs to me." The words froze her. She wanted to laugh, to brush them off as delirium, but something in his tone told her he wasn't joking. Elena stood quickly, trying to regain composure. "You should rest. You lost a lot of blood," but Adrian's eyes never left hers. In that moment, a silent pact was formed, one neither of them chose, but both would be bound to. From that day on, Elena's life would never be the same. At first, she tried to resist. She avoided him, kept her distance, and prayed he would vanish from her world. But Adrian Moretti was not a man who disappeared. He sent men to watch over her, to escort her home from work. At night, a sleek black car would wait at the corner of her street. At first, Elena thought it was paranoia, until one evening when she was walking home with Isabella, and a stranger tried to snatch her purse. Before she could scream, 2 of Adrian's men appeared from the shadows, pinning the attacker against the wall. "Mr. Moretti said you're under his protection," one of them told her before disappearing into the night. Elena was furious. She stormed into the hospital the next day, straight into Adrian's room, where he was recovering. "I don't need your men following me," she snapped. Adrian only smirked, reclining against his pillows like a king on a throne. "You're alive because of me. Don't mistake protection for punishment." Her anger faltered in the face of his calm. He was infuriating, arrogant, but beneath it all, there was something magnetic she couldn't deny. Over the next weeks, their worlds became entangled. Adrian visited her at odd hours, sometimes bleeding from another fight, sometimes just to watch her work. Elena tried to keep the boundaries clear, but every time their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them. She told herself she hated him. His arrogance, his power, the way he disrupted her simple life. But in the quiet of her room at night, she couldn't stop replaying the way his voice sounded when he said, "Your life belongs to me." Adrian, on the other hand, knew exactly what he was doing. He had faced betrayal, violence, and power struggles, but Elena was something different. She was a storm he couldn't control, and for once, he didn't want to. But the world he lived in was not kind to outsiders. And soon, Elena would realize that saving Adrian's life had chained her to a destiny far darker than she ever imagined. Life at St. Catherine's Hospital had always been busy, but after Adrian Moretti's arrival, Elena's days became heavier, shadowed by a presence she couldn't shake. Patients came and went, emergencies never stopped, yet she felt the weight of invisible eyes following her everywhere. At first, she told herself it was paranoia, a byproduct of dealing with a man like Adrian. But then Isabella noticed too. "Why is there always a car parked outside?" Isabella asked one night as they sat in their cramped kitchen, the smell of boiling pasta filling the air. Elena glanced out the window. The sleek black sedan was there, engine idling softly under the street lamp. She tried to dismiss it. Probably just neighbors. Don't think too much of it. But Isabella wasn't convinced. At 19, she was sharp-eyed, less naive than her sister wished. "Don't lie to me, Elena. Something's going on." "Who is he?" Elena's fork froze halfway to her mouth. She couldn't bring herself to say his name. How could she explain to Isabella that the man she had saved wasn't just another patient, but someone who lived in a world of guns, blood, and whispered deals? Before she could answer, a knock rattled their door. Isabella jumped. Elena's stomach twisted. She walked slowly to the door, heart pounding, and opened it just enough to see who stood there. It was Adrian. He looked impossibly out of place in their modest building, wearing a black coat that framed his tall figure, his green eyes catching the dim hallway light. Behind him, one of his men stood silently, hands folded in front of him. "Good evening, Elena," Adrian said smoothly. "I hope I'm not intruding." "You are," she said flatly, stepping out to block his view of the apartment. "What are you doing here?" "I came to thank you," Adrian replied. His voice was calm, but there was something in his tone that left no room for refusal. "Not just for saving my life, but for tolerating my presence in yours. I know it hasn't been easy." Elena tightened her grip on the door. "Then stop sending your men to watch me. Stop showing up at my door like this." A faint smile tugged at his lips. "That I cannot do." Behind her, Isabella whispered, "Who is he, Elena?" Adrian's eyes flicked toward the sound, but Elena quickly stepped outside, shutting the door behind her. She didn't want Isabella pulled into his world. "We're not doing this here," Elena hissed. "Leave us alone, Adrian." For the first time, his smile faded. His gaze sharpened, colder now, but still steady. "I told you, your life belongs to me. That means your safety, your well-being, everything. Whether you like it or not, Elena, you are part of my world now." And with that, he turned and walked away, his coat sweeping behind him, leaving Elena trembling in the hallway. The following weeks blurred together. Elena tried to bury herself in work, but Adrian was always there, in the background, in whispers among the staff, in the sudden silence that fell when a black car pulled up outside the hospital. Some of her colleagues began to suspect things, though none dared to ask outright. One night, when she was leaving her shift, she found Adrian waiting by the entrance. His wound had healed, though he still moved with the caution of someone recovering. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said, falling into step beside her. "I've been walking home alone for years," she shot back. "Years don't matter," Adrian replied, his voice low. "One wrong night can change everything. You of all people should know that." She wanted to argue, to tell him she wasn't afraid. But the truth was, his words sank deep. Every step through the dark streets felt heavier since that night in the hospital. Adrian noticed her silence. He stopped walking, forcing her to face him. "Elena, I'm not your enemy, but the world I live in, it doesn't forgive weakness. If you're near me, you'll need protection." "Accept that," she shook her head, exasperated. "You talk as if I have a choice." His lips curved slightly. "You don't." It wasn't long before Elena saw just how dangerous Adrian's world really was. It happened on a rainy evening. She and Isabella were walking back from the grocery store, their arms heavy with bags, when a group of men stepped out of an alleyway, blocking their path. "Well, what do we have here?" one of them sneered, his eyes narrowing at Elena. "This the nurse?" Fear surged through her chest. She tightened her hold on Isabella's arm, trying to back away, but the men closed in. One reached for her bag. Another grabbed her wrist. "Leave us alone," she cried, but her voice trembled. Then headlights cut through the rain. A black car screeched to a stop, and within seconds, Adrian's men spilled out. Guns flashed in the dim light. Voices barked commands, and the attackers scattered like rats. Adrian stepped out of the car last, his coat whipping in the wind, his eyes burning with fury. He reached Elena in 3 long strides, his hands gripping her shoulders. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. She shook her head, breathless, but Isabella clung to her, trembling. Adrian turned to his men, his voice sharp as a blade. "Find out who sent them. Tonight." The men nodded and disappeared into the rain. Elena pulled away from Adrian, her voice shaking with anger. "Do you see what's happening? Because of you, my sister and I are targets now." Adrian's expression hardened, but his voice softened when he spoke. "No, Elena, you were a target the moment you saved my life. My enemies would have found you sooner or later. The only difference now is that you have me." She wanted to scream at him, to tell him he was wrong, but deep down, she knew he wasn't. The shadows of his world had already wrapped around her. Later that night, after Isabella had finally fallen asleep, Elena sat by the window, staring out at the rain. She could still feel Adrian's hands on her shoulders, the intensity in his eyes. She hated him for pulling her into his world, but she hated herself more for feeling the strange safety his presence brought. Adrian, meanwhile, sat in his penthouse, a glass of whiskey untouched at his side. He replayed the night in his mind, the fear in Elena's eyes, the way she had clung to her sister. For years, he had built walls around himself, shutting out everything human. But now, those walls were cracking. He told himself it was just a debt, that she was alive because of him, and so he owed her his protection. But deep down, Adrian knew the truth. Elena Marquez was becoming more than a debt. She was becoming the one whisper in the dark he couldn't silence. The attack on Elena and Isabella was only the beginning. Adrian's world, once carefully balanced, had begun to fracture. Rumors spread through the underground that his enemies had found a new weakness. Not money, not territory, but a woman. Elena's name began slipping into conversations in dimly lit bars, in whispered exchanges over poker tables, in threats delivered with cruel smiles. Adrian tightened his grip on his empire. His men patrolled the streets with renewed vigilance. Alliances were reinforced, and traitors were rooted out with merciless efficiency. Yet no matter how much blood he spilled, no matter how many enemies he silenced, he couldn't erase the gnawing fear that Elena would be caught in the crossfire. For Elena, life turned into a cage of velvet and iron. Adrian insisted on assigning her escorts at all times, shadowing her even at the hospital. At first, her colleagues gossiped, teasing her about the mysterious men who lingered in the waiting area. But soon, whispers turned into unease. Patients were frightened, staff avoided her, and Elena felt the weight of eyes judging her every move. One evening, as she left her shift, Adrian was waiting by the car. His presence, as always, drew stares. "I told you not to come here," she hissed as she approached him. Adrian opened the door for her, ignoring the looks. "And I told you, you don't give me orders, Elena." Her jaw clenched, but she slid into the seat anyway. The drive was quiet at first, the city's lights streaking past the windows. Finally, she broke the silence. "You're ruining my life," she said softly, her voice cracking. Adrian's grip tightened on the wheel. "No, Elena, I'm keeping you alive." "Alive?" She shot back. "I was alive before you ever walked into that hospital. Now every day feels like a countdown. I don't even recognize myself anymore." Adrian pulled the car to the side of the road, turning to face her. His green eyes burned with intensity. "You don't understand. The moment you touched my blood, you became part of my story. You saved me. And in doing so, you tied yourself to everything I am. There's no undoing it." Elena's chest rose and fell rapidly. She wanted to deny it, to push him away. But deep inside, she knew there was no escape. The storm had already claimed her. Meanwhile, Adrian's enemies circled closer. Among them was Marco Belanti, a ruthless rival who had waited years for Adrian to slip. Marco wasn't just another thug. He was cunning, patient, and had the kind of cruel charm that drew people to his side. When he learned about Elena, he saw his opening. "She's his weakness," Marco told his men one night, swirling a glass of brandy in his hand. "We strike there, and Adrian Moretti will crumble." Plans were set in motion. The night of the gala arrived, a charity event hosted by one of Adrian's allies, where the city's elite mingled under chandeliers, unaware of the blood-soaked empires behind their glittering jewels. Adrian brought Elena with him, not as a guest, but as a shielded presence. He insisted it was safer for her to be by his side than left vulnerable. She wore a simple black dress he had sent to her apartment earlier that day, and though she resented the gesture, she couldn't deny the way his eyes lingered when she entered the room. For a moment, amid the music and laughter, they almost looked like any other couple. But the illusion shattered quickly. Halfway through the evening, Elena slipped away from Adrian's side, needing air. She stepped onto a balcony overlooking the city, the cool night breeze brushing her face. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sliver of peace. Then a voice broke the silence. "Beautiful night, isn't it?" She turned sharply. A man stood at the edge of the balcony, his suit crisp, his smile disarming. But there was something in his eyes that unsettled her, too sharp, too calculating. "I'm Marco," he said, offering a hand. "And you must be the famous Elena." Her stomach dropped. She didn't need Adrian to tell her who Marco was. She felt danger radiating from him. Before she could respond, Adrian appeared in the doorway, his presence filling the balcony like a storm. His eyes locked on Marco, and the air grew heavy. "Step away," Adrian said, his voice low but lethal. Marco chuckled, raising his hands innocently. "Relax, Adrian. I was just introducing myself. After all, the city is buzzing with talk of your new companion." Elena felt Adrian's hand slide around her waist, pulling her close. "She's none of your concern," he growled. Marco's smile widened. "On the contrary, everyone connected to you is my concern." The tension crackled like lightning, but before it could ignite, guests began spilling onto the balcony, breaking the moment. Marco slipped away with a mocking bow, his eyes never leaving Adrian's. Elena could feel Adrian's heart pounding against her side. She looked up at him, whispering, "Who was that?" His jaw tightened. "The man who wants to destroy me." That night, Adrian didn't let Elena out of his sight. When they returned to his penthouse, she finally erupted. "You brought me into this," she shouted, pacing the room. "You put me in the crosshairs of men like him. I saved your life, Adrian, but I didn't sign up for this." Adrian stood silently watching her. When she finally stopped, trembling with rage, he spoke. "You think you saved me," he said quietly. "But the truth is you condemned yourself. The moment you touched me, you painted a target on your back. I can't change that. All I can do is protect you." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "And what if I don't want your protection?" His voice broke, raw for the first time. "Then you'll die, Elena, and I can't let that happen." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with everything neither of them could say. Outside, the city pulsed with life, unaware that within those walls, two people stood at the crossroads of fate, bound by blood, debt, and something far more dangerous: desire. Elena barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marco's smile. It wasn't just the look of a rival. It was the look of a predator who had marked his prey. She tossed in bed, restless, while Adrian stood near the window with a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring out at the city as though he could control it with sheer will. At dawn, she finally spoke. "He'll come for me, won't he?" Adrian didn't look at her. His voice was low, steady. "Yes." Her throat tightened. She sat up, clutching the sheets. "Then why keep me here? Why not let me disappear before he strikes?" Now he turned, and there was fire in his eyes. "Because you're not running. I already lost too many people to this life. I won't lose you too." Elena's heart pounded. His words sounded less like protection and more like possession. But she couldn't deny the tremor in his voice, the edge of desperation. Meanwhile, Marco Belanti began moving his pieces across the board. He spread rumors about Adrian's weakening grip, bribed city officials, and promised rewards to anyone who could deliver information about Elena. He wasn't after money. He wanted to break Adrian from the inside. In a smoky backroom meeting, one of Marco's lieutenants asked, "Why her? Why not just hit his business, his men?" Marco leaned back, smiling coldly. "Because men like Adrian can survive losing fortunes, even armies. But love will gut him like a blade." His men exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared to question him further. The following week, Adrian called a meeting with his most trusted lieutenants. They gathered around a long mahogany table, tension thick in the air. "He'll try to take her," Adrian said flatly, his voice echoing off the walls. "I want eyes everywhere. No one gets near her without my knowing." One of his men hesitated. "Boss, with all due respect, maybe it would be safer to send her away, somewhere no one knows her." The silence that followed was sharp. Adrian's gaze hardened, his jaw set. "She stays with me. If Marco wants her, he'll have to go through me first." The room fell silent. No one dared argue further. For Elena, the days blurred into one long, suffocating routine. Armed guards shadowed her steps. Adrian's men checked her apartment, her workplace, even the streets she walked. She felt less like a woman and more like a prisoner. One evening, she cornered Adrian in his study. "This isn't living," she told him, her voice trembling. "This is a cage." Adrian set down his pen, leaning back in his chair. "It's survival." "Survival isn't worth it if I lose myself," she whispered. He looked at her for a long moment, then stood, approaching her slowly. His presence was overwhelming, magnetic, terrifying. He cupped her face in his hand, forcing her to meet his gaze. "You won't lose yourself," he said softly, "because I won't let you." Her breath caught in her throat. She wanted to pull away, to scream, but part of her melted under the weight of his words, under the raw hunger in his eyes. But the fragile balance shattered one stormy night. Elena was leaving the hospital late, rain pouring down as she hurried toward the car waiting for her. Her escorts flanked her, scanning the streets. Suddenly, headlights flared in the distance. A black van screeched to a halt and masked men leapt out. "Go! Go!" one of the guards shouted, pulling his gun. Chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked through the rain. Screams echoed in the night. Elena was shoved toward the car, but before she could climb inside, rough hands grabbed her. She struggled, kicking and clawing, her screams swallowed by thunder. "Adrian!" she cried, though he was nowhere in sight. Within seconds, she was dragged into the van. Tires screeched, and the vehicle vanished into the storm. Her guards lay wounded on the pavement, their blood mixing with the rain. When Adrian got the call, his world stopped. "She's gone," his lieutenant said, voice shaking. Adrian's glass shattered in his hand. For a moment he couldn't breathe, then rage consumed him, a fire hotter than anything he had ever known. "Marco," he growled, his voice like thunder. He took her. The hunt began. Elena awoke in a dark, damp room, her wrists bound, her head throbbing. The faint light of a single bulb revealed peeling walls, a chair, and the silhouette of a man seated across from her. Marco. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, smiling like a wolf. Finally, we meet properly. Elena's heart pounded in terror. Why are you doing this? Because you, Marco said smoothly, are Adrian's beating heart, and I want to watch it bleed. She glared at him, though her voice trembled. You'll never win. He'll come for me, Marco laughed. Oh, I hope he does. I want him to see you here, helpless, before I take everything from him. Back at his penthouse, Adrian gathered his men, his fury a storm barely contained. No more waiting, he said. No more hiding. I want Marco's head on a plate. His men nodded, armed to the teeth, but Adrian's mind wasn't on the war. It was on Elena. He could still hear her voice, could still see her eyes, and he swore to himself that no matter how much blood it took, no matter how deep into hell he had to go, he would bring her back. Because for the first time in his life, Adrian Moretti had something he couldn't afford to lose. The city didn't sleep that night. Every alley, every shadow seemed to whisper Marco's name. Adrian's men spread across the streets like wolves, hunting, sniffing, tearing apart anyone who dared to hide the truth. Adrian himself didn't rest. He sat in the back of a black SUV, eyes burning with sleepless fury, his hand clenching the same old scarred cane he carried into every fight. To others, it was a symbol of his past wounds, but tonight, it was a promise of death. Meanwhile, Elena was locked in Marco's hidden warehouse by the docks. The air reeked of oil and rust, the sound of waves slamming against the shore echoing through the steel walls. She was chained to a chair, her wrists raw from the iron cuffs. Marco circled her like a predator savoring his prey. You know, he murmured, lighting a cigar, Adrian once left a man begging for life in this very place. Funny, isn't it? Now it's his turn to beg. Elena glared at him, though her fear trembled beneath the surface. You'll never break him, Marco smirked. Everyone breaks. I just needed the right lever. And you, my dear, are perfect. Adrian's men finally traced Marco's hideout through whispers and blood trails. Sammy, his most loyal lieutenant, barged into the SUV, breathless. We found her, the docks. But it's a trap, boss. He's waiting for you. Adrian's lips curved into a grim smile. Good. I've been waiting too. He loaded his gun, checked the blade strapped under his jacket, and stepped out into the rain. His men followed, a dozen shadows ready to wage war. The storm that night was biblical. Lightning split the sky, thunder roared like cannon fire, and the rain poured so hard it blurred the city lights. By the time Adrian reached the warehouse, the docks were drowned in shadows and mist. Inside, Marco was ready. Dozens of armed guards lined the walls, their rifles gleaming in the dim light. At the center, Elena sat chained, her eyes wide as she saw Adrian push open the massive doors. For a moment, time froze. Adrian's gaze met hers, and something unspoken passed between them. A vow. A lifeline. Then Marco clapped slowly, mockingly. Ah, the king arrives. Tell me, Adrian, how does it feel, knowing your empire crumbles and the one thing you care for is in my hands? Adrian stepped forward, cane in one hand, gun in the other. His voice was steel. The mistake you made, Marco, was thinking I had anything left to lose. The firefight exploded in an instant. Adrian's men clashed with Marco's guards, bullets sparking against steel beams, shouts and screams swallowed by thunder. Adrian moved like a predator unleashed, every shot precise, every strike brutal. He wasn't just fighting. He was unleashing years of rage, betrayal, and pain. Marco fought too, a savage grin on his face, as though chaos was his home. The two men tore through the battlefield until finally, they faced each other at the center of the storm. Elena struggled against her chains, screaming, "Adrian!" as the two titans collided. Their fight was raw, brutal. No elegance, no rules, just fists, blood, and fury. Marco slammed Adrian against the steel wall, snarling, "You're finished, old man." Adrian spat blood, his eyes blazing. "I'm not the one chained." With a roar, he drove his cane into Marco's ribs, then slammed him onto the ground. The sound of bones cracking echoed through the warehouse. Marco gasped, coughing blood, but still grinned. "You think this ends with me?" he hissed. "There will always be another. Men like us. We don't get happy endings." Adrian raised his gun, pressing it against Marco's forehead. For a long, tense moment, silence reigned. Then Adrian lowered the weapon. "You're right," he said coldly. "Men like us don't, but she does." He turned, fired at the chains binding Elena, and they snapped free. She collapsed into his arms, sobbing in relief. Marco, broken and bleeding, tried to crawl toward his gun, but Adrian's lieutenant ended it with a single shot. The echo rang like a final note of war. Outside, as dawn broke, the storm finally began to fade. Smoke curled from the warehouse ruins, mingling with the first pale light of morning. Adrian stood at the edge of the docks, Elena beside him, her hand trembling in his. For once, he let her hold it, didn't pull away. "You came for me," she whispered. His jaw tightened, eyes fixed on the horizon. "I always would." She turned to him, her voice breaking. "Then let me stay, Adrian. Not as your prisoner, but as the one who chooses you." For the first time, the cold walls around his heart cracked. He didn't smile, didn't speak, but his silence was louder than any vow. In the weeks that followed, Marco's empire collapsed. His allies scattered, his fortune devoured by debts and betrayal. Adrian's men rebuilt, stronger, united not just by fear, but by loyalty. And Elena, she remained. Some whispered she was a fool, others claimed she was his weakness. But those who looked closely saw the truth. She was his anchor, the only thing keeping the storm from consuming him whole. Adrian Moretti still walked as a king in shadows, still ruled with iron and fire. But now, when the nights grew cold, there was a light waiting for him. Not redemption, not forgiveness, something rarer. Love born from the ashes of war.